Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Very big news in the world of sports wagering, where New York State, of course, when sports betting became legal, decided to have a tax rate which some people felt was egregious, over 51%. Well, every other state wants to follow suit, so congrats to New York for setting the tone. Will it continue? Let's check in with Matthew Waters of Legal Sports Report. And Matt, this was a very big deal at the time, several years ago. New York gets sports betting. All of a sudden, they're charging 51%. The sports betting operators say, whoa, this is too much. We can't handle it. Now every state is trying to follow suit. And what I would say is maybe other states don't get to that 51%, but we've definitely seen some hikes in tax rates across the country, I think as a direct result as to what New York State was able to accomplish.
Well, Craig, I think there's no doubt that when New York set the bar so high, you had some other states go back and say, wait, we could do that? Some of these states went lower than it was expected to. Some of the states went higher, right? Everybody thought Pennsylvania was egregious with its 36% tax and a $10 million license fee. And it turns out that fit pretty well for that market too. Everybody jumped into that market the same way that, the operators were back and forth on this 51%, but at the end of the day, they still bid to get in the market because it's New York, right? And that was kind of the message that we heard at the National Council of Legislators from Gaming States last week. This is a meeting where lawmakers can get together and hear what other lawmakers in other states have done and get an idea of what they should be doing in their state. And it's clear that New York took this 51% tax rate, but it's New York. That's why it was able to do that. Everybody, you want to be in New York. You think about how many people, one, live in the state, but then two, travel in and out of the state. And it's just a customer acquisition must to be in New York if you're going to be a national company. But this 51%, the operators want to see it come down. And that's crazy, right? When have you known government to give back money, Craig? And that is what, as much as Troy Mackey, he's from the New York Assembly's Racing and Wagering Committee. He's the coordinator of that committee. And that's what he said. He said, quote, New York is doing extremely well. And it's one of those things that you cannot go back now, unfortunately, to reduce the tax rate. We tried to revisit that, and there was no justification. Well, you couldn't justify taking away money from education and giving it to a corporation. That is the argument we've been up against. And Craig, I think that should be the argument they are up against. These companies that run sports betting, they are businesses. They are trying to make money, and that's great. But at the end of the day, when you say 51% of that money is going to the kids and education, going back on that is not what I would call politically a good idea. They've raised billions for education, Craig, and they can't stop now. They had tried to lower the tax rate by writing a bill to let more people come in. Mackey said that the original bill should have had more operators and it should have been taxed around 37%. That's where they thought the line should have been. And now we know that of course it's not. There's 9 operators and 51%. And Craig, they can complain about maybe offering worse odds, maybe doing this or that, not promoting as much, whatever, but they're going to be stuck with that 51%. So now, Craig, they're going to have to go when it comes time for iGaming. They're going to have to fight for the tax rate there and try to get a little bit back because sports betting just isn't going to change at this point.
Yeah, and what I found really amusing last year was when some of the sports betting operators said, oh, we may have to pull out of New York because of the tax rate being so high. Yeah. Did that ever happen? No. And that never will happen again. 49% of billions as opposed to 49% of millions on a granular level will tell you all you need to know about how many people are betting in New York. They're not going anywhere. All right. So as you mentioned, now this is where perhaps some money can be made for the operators to sort of deflect this 51%, and that would be in iGaming. Now, how would this work as far as the revenue is concerned? Because they would, naturally more people are betting on iGaming and it's growing, but how would that exactly work in terms of benefiting that?
Well, if you're talking about with the tax rate, Craig, iGaming is taxed differently in the 7 or so jurisdictions that we have it in the U.S. Pennsylvania, for example, taxes it the same way that they tax the games at retail casinos. So the slots and tables, they pay the same rate. These operators have a chance with New York to try to get that down. And look, they came into this saying sports betting is low margin. iGaming is higher than that. We know that iGaming can make money. It's still not huge margins, but the amount of money that rolls into iGaming, the handle, the drop, is much more than sports betting. So we're looking at iGaming and sports betting around the country, and Chad Bainon of Macquarie actually just raised his expectations for what operators will report in the second quarter, and he thinks online revenue grew 34% in the second quarter, and that is updated from his model of 21%. It was an interesting second quarter. Slower, of course, it always is, but we had some interesting battles in the NBA playoffs, and we have these other operators now, the ESPN Bet, the Fanatics, we have Bet365 entering new states, and so we want to see the slower months still growing, right? We want to see the older states still doing their part and still adding more customers and seeing their customers betting more. At the same time, you want these operators to still be lowering their promotional spending and getting to that profitability line, right, Craig? And so Chad thinks that 3 sportsbooks are in good shape: DraftKings, FanDuel, and BetRivers. He thinks that they're set up nicely to outperform in the second quarter. And based on New York, right, you can look at those numbers and they report by operator. It gives you an idea of what the larger market overall might be looking like. Chad said that he's a little wary on what the hold could look like for BetMGM and Caesars. So, right now we are still seeing growth in iGaming and sports betting, but obviously that growth could be a whole heck of a lot more for iGaming if more states jumped on. And New York is one of those states that people are looking at to possibly do it next year, correct?
Yeah, again, big stories coming next year, I think, with iGaming and also the legalization of sports betting, maybe in a new state. We just haven't gotten a lot of that this year. All right, FanDuel, DraftKings, household names in sports betting. There are some others. Let's give BetMGM the credit. They may not be first or second, but they're right there, third, fourth, etc. New CEO Gavin Isaacs from Entain jumps on board. What does this mean for their company?
Yeah, if you know casino gaming, Craig, then you know the name Gavin Isaacs. He's done some really big things in the industry. He's been with huge companies. He was the CEO of Scientific Games and then the chairman when they owned OpenBet. OpenBet is a huge sports betting supplier in the industry. After he left Scientific Games, he took chairman positions and board positions at some pretty important companies. He was chairman at SB Tech, which is the platform tech provider that DraftKings bought. He was also on the DraftKings board, and he was an advisor to the board of Jackpocket, which DraftKings just bought. So he's been in the industry. He's been cutting his teeth on sports betting. And look, Entain, they admitted last year that they were not fast enough to get U.S.-focused products to BetMGM to compete well enough with these big names. Gavin Isaacs is not going to let that happen. He's going to come in. He's going to right the ship of the tech side of BetMGM, and shareholders should definitely be excited about that.
Yeah, would agree. Well, Matt, great stuff. Great breakdown, and thanks again for coming on NewsWire. We'll catch up again next week.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.